what I was going to tell you, I'll give you first I'll give you an example. Excuse me. When I moved to New York, when I came to New York, looking for a job, there was a woman that worked at the agency that I worked in Miami, and she came up with me basically the same time, and we stayed in touch. And I was walking by the executive VP's place at Gray Advertising, which was a huge building at the time, like 1,200 people there. But the EVP, and I was just maybe was there for 3 months or something like that. And I had to deliver something to him, and I was looking for his secretary, and he comes out and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking for your secretary." And she says, "No, Joel, come on in and we'll talk." And he says, "My secretary left me, and I just don't know what to do." And I said, "You know what? I have a secretary for you. She came up with Miami, and she's a crackerjack." He says, "Get her name and bring it to me." So I did that. She got hired. 15 years later, I'm looking for a job. I quit my job, and I call up, and she answers the phone. I call the executive VP of. He moved to another agency, but he was on the board of directors, and he was a big mucky muck. And I called his office, and she answered the phone, and she says, "Joel?" I said, "Joyce? I can't believe it." She says, "He doesn't see anybody at your level, but he'll see you." So I go to his office, and it was dismal. The agency was on like 3rd Avenue, and it was just an awful-looking metal-type old agency. And I walk into his room. He wasn't there yet. And I look on the walls, and there's leather, there's pictures of ranches, there's saddles, and he walks in. I said, "Dick, what is this?" And he says, "The West is where it's at, Joel. You've done New York. You should consider going outside of New York." And I went, "No, New York is it for advertising." He says, "We do 65% of our business outside of New York." He says, "And I think I have a job for you." So he says, "The West is where it's at." Picks up the phone, and he says to Interpublic, which owned several agencies, he says, "I have your general manager of your Cleveland office here." And I went, "Cleveland?" And he says, "Joel, it pays $150,000. You get a bonus, and you get stock." He says, "And you can do anything you want. And it's Sherman-Williams. That's the account." I said, "Can I get back to you about that?" And but the idea to leave New York became a part of my being, basically. I was looking outside of New York, and I never found anything I liked. And then one day I was homesick, and I read an ad in Ad Age for someone with my background. I was a specialist in food service and in the food areas, so it had my outline. So I sent the resume in, and it said San Francisco. And by that time, I had met Susan on a blind date, but I was still working in New York. She was working in San Francisco. Anyway, so I answered to the ad and I forgot about it. And I'm home one day, and I get a phone call from a guy who says, "I'm with the merchandising factory." And I said, "I don't need any vacuums." And I said, "Can we get this conversation over with quick?" And he says, "Joel, it's for a job in San Francisco." So he got on the phone, and he says, "So Joel, tell me what you do." I said, "Well, my strength is in new business." He says, I do new business. And I said, well, I guess we have nothing to talk about. He says, but San Francisco, it's so beautiful, and you're, a terrible place there. I said, don't sell me the sun. I came from Miami, and I know all about that. And he said, look, I'm going to fly to New York to see you. So he flies to New York. He gives me his pitch, and the pitch was exactly what I was doing. And so we made a deal, and I now have to go home and tell my kids, who lost their mother, that I'm taking them out of school and I'm taking them to San Francisco. And I won't go into details because they did stay till the end of school, but I got the job and I went to San Francisco. And so you'd have to say, what if I had not placed or helped place a secretary? Would I have left New York, or would I have gone to San Francisco? That's a what if. And that's pretty much throughout my whole life. What if my friend in Miami wasn't going to New York? What if my friend, my roommate in college, wasn't going to the University of Florida? And it just goes throughout my whole life. And the only thing I can think of is that I took a course on positive thinking, and in that course they taught us to take bad things and make them into good things. Look at opportunities out of bad things happen. So when my wife died, I actually did that basically, and so I started to use that too. When I quit Al Rosenthal, it was because I knew that I was going to be in a better place. And I don't know where all that came from, but that has been dotted throughout my whole life, especially considering I'll give you one big what if. My father was in the military during World War II. He got badly wounded. He was in a battlefield, on the battlefield, unconscious with a live grenade in his hand for 19 hours. And when they got there, they pried open the hand, took the live grenade and threw it away. And he survived. What if he hadn't? So, that was an experience. And by the way, I heard that years later. He never told me about it. He never talked about the war. But, then where would I have been? What would I have done? Who knows? But it's a life lesson, that's for sure. I don't know what you could get out of that, but. I can't tell whether we're on or off.
Oh, we're on. Cameras are running.
Okay.
Okay, we're on. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. That was well, it's like when it's like you have the capacity to kind of open yourself up to greater possibilities.
To greater what?
Possibilities.
Yeah, sure.
Not just opportunities, but possibilities.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you do that.
Well, when you look at let's just take the move from New York. When I got to the agency that I joined, it was almost bankrupt, and I didn't know that. I wanted to live in Tiburon, and I was told I didn't have enough money to live in Tiburon. And I said to the real estate agent, I want to live in Tiburon. And she says, you can't. So she started showing me stuff. And I said, no, I want to live in Tiburon. So Susan went to Europe. By that time, she was in the picture. She took care of the kids, and she wanted to marry me. and you know, it was like I couldn't get married because I still had this feeling that I was cheating because, you know, and I kept saying, if you're going to get married, I'm going to marry you. But anyway, she said, look, I'm leaving to go to Europe for 2 weeks. You take my car, and if Anita, who was the real estate agent, calls you you better get your butt over there. So Anita, whom I met by accident with Susan, we went to the wrong real estate agent. My boss wanted me to go to another one to live where he was living. And so I didn't do that. We drove by it by mistake, and we went in, and there was this one woman there, and Anita was her name, and I said, you're not going to like me because I have a house in New York. I just started a job, and I said, and there are no guarantees, but I want to live in Tiburon. And she said, you can't live in Tiburon. So we went through that. So the call comes from Anita saying, I found your house in Tiburon. And I went over, walked through it, and said, I'll take it. And then she came unglued because I shouldn't have said that. And then they tried to get me out of the transaction. So I had to get a loan from a Redwood Bank, who was the agency's banker. So I go over there and I said, look, I'm EVP of the merchandising factory, and you're not, I need a loan. He says, well, I don't know, Joel. I don't know that you qualify, you know. So I said, hey, you want to lose the account? I said, I have that power. He says, don't badger me. So a week later, I call him and say, are you going to do this or aren't you? He said, well, I'm going to do it. But nothing happened. And then now they wanted to get out of the deal because I bid very low, and they wanted out. And so I called them and I said, okay, let's do it on a human level. I'm out here. I need a loan or I'm going to lose my house. Are you going to do that or aren't you? And he says, oh, okay. And he did it. And that saved the deal. So living in Tiburon was terrific. And you know, we're there 21 years in the same house. Susan wouldn't fix up the house. She thought it was a barn. And but the minute I told her I was marrying her, she fixed up the house and it looked great. But she wasn't willing to do that until I married her, you know. But Tiburon was big in a big move. The kids weren't in love with it. I mean, they saw it differently than we did, you know, because we knew where it was. So I asked my son, well, if you didn't live in Tiburon, where would you want to live? And he said, Toledo. I said, Toledo. It's like Cleveland, right? Yeah, that's how I got the house. Everything was always, I've got a good future. So I turned that agency around, and I became president and stayed there 11 years. Then he decided, the guy that owned it decided that he didn't need me anymore. And I ended up taking the Carnation account, started my own agency, which then became Nestle. And I had that account for 25 years in the food business. And Nestle was a very difficult company to work with. You know, I would tell a story about, they're kind of like the SS. They teach their people a certain way, and then they kill their dog after they've been trained. I said, well, these people have been trained to negotiate. And if they don't get their way, they'll kill you. And somehow I managed 25 years with that company. And that educated my kids and, gave me some prosperity. But I knew I wasn't going to get rich in advertising. It just wasn't there. I mean, if you're doing the right job, you're giving a lot back. And if you're dealing with major blue chip companies, which I did, they kept demanding more and more and more and more. And when you complained, they said, look, that's the cost of dealing with us. That's what happens. And it was true. So I delivered a product that was better than any product they had in advertising. So I would get calls from other divisions saying, get me the Carnation Touch. Do what you do there for me, which they never ever wanted to spend the money to do. But it did fuel my popularity at the company. And so the idea was you give more than you get back. And that's how you do it. And the quality level was incredibly high. And it cost us a lot of money to do it. But that was probably part of my success. Also, during that time, I started investing in small companies, figuring that if I got a piece of the action, while they were small or startups, it might lead to something else, and that worked big time, actually. So do you want me to talk about that?
Well, what I'd like you to talk about is the thread of excellence.
Okay.
Do you need a
Yeah, sure. I'll talk to that. I'll toast you for that.
So,
Well,
you went from being a C student.
The question is, where did that come from?
Well, it's a thread that's been running. I believe it was there always, but somehow it got on fire at some point when you were in college and you took the marketing class that you fell in love with. So something sparked something.
Well, what sparked it probably was the fact that I worked at every agency I worked at in New York had a different philosophy. One of them, I don't know if you've ever heard of the unique selling proposition. Well, that was in the days when I was working in New York, which was from 1958 until 75. But early on, there was an ad agency called Ted Bates, and they were absolutely, totally different than gray advertising. And they believed that if you repeated the same proposition 3 times in a 30-second commercial, that you'd increase sales 20%. And they proved it. And so they had all these big accounts like M&M and the U.S. Navy and big pharmaceutical accounts. And so when I joined them, I had these kind of scuzzy accounts like Preparation H, and it would be cures hemorrhoids without surgery, which you could never get away with today. And so I had one about what do you have on your warts? Preparation, I think it was called Preparation W or something like that. Takes warts off in seconds, and it was like, really, I mean, it was just not really my cup of tea, although they were very successful at it. So who was for me to talk? But they loved what I did, and they wanted more people like me, which probably meant that, like my cousin, who was looking for a job, he was from Louisville, and he'd been in the military, and he was going to get married, and he needed a job. And he walked into my Bates office, And he says, "Can I take off my jacket? It's 110 out." I said, "No." So what do you mean, no? I said, anyone can walk in here. And with that, the boss walks in. And this guy was a millionaire. I mean, he was a golden guy. And he walks in and he's talking to me, but looking at him the whole time. When he leaves, I get a call from him saying, "Is he really your cousin?" I said, "Yeah." "Is he as good as you?" I said, "Oh, yeah, probably better." He says, "Okay." He's got the job. And but anyway, I decided that that was not for me. It was just too cut and dried, and I wasn't interested. And I went with a small agency that featured food, and worked on some very big food accounts. And then that came to an end because my boss was an alcoholic. And he would promise all kinds of things and deliver nothing. And when I said, "I'll do the marketing plan," he said, "No, no, I'll do the marketing plan." And so they blamed it on me that he did not deliver because I was the number 2 guy. So they wanted to fire me. And I said, "Be my guest." And he said, "Well, what do you mean, be your guest?" I said, "If you want to fire me, fire me." I said, "You don't know what you're doing because I'm the only one that does the work on the account. But you'll hear about that." So then I started looking. I got a job at Doyle Dane, which was the odd agency. So then they come back to me and say, "No, no, you're right. We found out you were right. We want to give you your job back." I said, "No way." And I went to Doyle Dane as a result. So that was an example of taking a negative and making it into a positive. So it was the kind of business that you had to be on your feet and be on your toes and not worry about who was behind you, because there was somebody behind you about to kill you, you know. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. You know.
I believe it.
Yeah, yeah. So that, I don't know where we're going with that, but...
Well, I think we started with the thread of excellence. Like how
Oh, okay. So the reaction from Bates was the bare bones type thing. And then I went to Doyle Dane and worked with the top creatives in the world at that time. And I decided to carry that forward into whatever agency I was going to start. And that's basically what I did. You know, it was, especially in food, because if you ever looked at all the food advertising for that time, you would never eat the food today. I mean, it was just terrible photography, terrible this, terrible that. And they looked at it as a packaged goods. And I looked at it as you could take food and make it into where your taste buds are just asking for it. And so I started doing that. And Carnation at the time had an agency for 100 years, and they made terrible advertising, but they were locked in to an old management when I came along. I pitched that business for 5 years until I got it. And then when I got it, I created a look for them that was totally different than what they had. And it became contagious. So everybody wants their product to look. The idea was they added something of quality to every product they had. They had 2,000 products. But their sales force thought cheese was cheese. And yeah, it was cheese, except they added 17% more cheese. But they weren't getting their money back for it. So they weren't doing much business because people in the business said, "It's too expensive. Tell me why I should have that." Well, when we changed the look and changed we called it the Carnation Touch, it worked. The sales force suddenly realized they had something to sell, and their cards had little gold on it, and we just did everything first class, and that really took off, and that fueled, 20 years or actually 25 years.
So how did you know to do that?
My experiences with different creatives and different, I think that was behind it. And the other one was the lack of, Rosser Reeves, the guy that was at Ted Bates, that was the creative director, and he wrote books about advertising. His sales pitch was, let's say it was a Betty Crocker. He'd take every type of Betty Crocker type product from the competitors and put them all in our new business pitch and show that everybody was looking exactly the same, mundane look. Every one of them was the same. So how do you differentiate? And that kind of triggered my idea that you can differentiate. By looking better in what you do, you create a value added that is an intangible. And that worked for me in my agency on every product that I had, that we did. We looked for making, well, a good example of that is a product called Oregon Chai, which I invested in early on. And I don't know if you know what chai is, but at the time, chai was mostly an Indian type thing from India. And we made it into from our advertising, made it into a kind of an Americanized drink. It tasted really good. And we were the teeniest little company. And what we did is we did quality sales sheets, quality advertising. And then when I went to sell it, one of the reasons they got so much money for it was because of the advertising. And so that paid off. So that was one example. I mean, I can give you 10, but that helped me because when they sold, I owned part of that company, and yeah.